This is Voices in the Game. We want to thank you all so much for joining us for another episode. Now, if you are looking for somebody who has literally done it all in the sports and the broadcasting industry, then you can look and hear no further than our guest today. He has worked in the sports industry for over 30 years, wearing so many different hats. He is currently working as a freelance play-by-play announcer based out of the Dallas, Texas area. He is Chris Mycoskie. Chris, how you doing, my friend? Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Colton, doing well. I've been enjoying the episode so far and honored that you would have me.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. And we really appreciate you coming on. We can't wait to get our conversation started. Now, before we do get our conversation started, we want to make sure to let all of our wonderful listeners know to please make sure to follow and subscribe wherever you are listening or watching this podcast on either Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or if you are watching on YouTube. Now, Chris, I cannot wait to get our conversation started. So let's begin. So, Chris, can you take us back to the beginning, with you growing up in the Dallas area? What first drew you to wanting to have a career in the sports industry and particularly sports broadcasting? And was there a particular game that thought, hey, I think this is what I want to do?
Well, I don't think any particular game. It was just a lot of different aspects of growing up where it was almost inevitable that I would end up working in sports one way or another. My grandfathers, who were my best friends, both of them involved in sports in different ways. My grandfather on my dad's side was the team doctor for the Texas Rangers. So I grew up going to the clubhouse and going to spring training every spring. And then my other grandfather, my mom's dad, was a sports writer and then in sports marketing. And so all of those conversations and just looking at what they were able to do and those special experiences I was able to have because of my grandfather and my dad with the Rangers. And then also, my mom was incredibly talented writer and photographer who encouraged me in so many different ways to go after what I wanted to do. And when I was young, it was to be a sports writer. That's all I wanted. I mean, I would from a very young age, I was writing sports articles. I was distributing my own newspaper to my neighborhood and eventually submitted some articles to the Four Star Telegram for their kids and teens section where I worked for them for 6 years from sixth grade on.
So, how were you able, Chris, to really hone your skills so early? Because, like you said, you really did get a start in this industry, before college, like you said, when you were with the Fourth Worst Star Telegram and also being a bat boy for the Rangers as well.
Yeah, well, the bat boy part, that's every baseball loving kid's dream, right? I mean, that was, you have to know somebody. And thankfully, I knew quite a few people in the organization and was able to do that as soon as I turned 16, did it for a couple of seasons. But I'm sorry, what did you want to know exactly about that?
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yes, Chris. How was that like for you knowing that you were able to have all those connections to
Oh,
really
yeah.
get your start so early, before you went to college?
Well, like I said, I really was encouraged very much to pursue what I wanted to do, and I think that really permeated throughout my life. It's never been just waiting for when everybody else thinks that you should be doing something. It's go after it, and I would had the great coaching as far as sports writing goes from my mom, from my grandfather, and was really able to hone those skills early and continue to pursue it. And decided to attend the University of Missouri. And at the time when I first went there, thought I was going for print and thought that's where I would end up. Still did that for about a year when I first arrived, but fell in love with the broadcast side of it while I was there.
What changed your mind, Chris, when you were at Mizzou that said, hey, I think I might want to switch to the broadcasting side instead?
It was just more fun. And also, kind of late in high school, when I was working at the Star Telegram, one of my friends there kind of noticed how my voice had changed and said, with that voice, you need to talk to my friend at the radio station. So introduced me to Steve Lamb at WBAP 820, and I got to work with him over the summer before I went to college. So I was still kind of double dipping when I got to Mizzou, worked for the city newspaper and worked for the student radio station. And after about a year of that, I just decided, the broadcast way was what I wanted to go after. So continued to work for the student radio station and for the university owned TV station there at Mizzou.
What was it like for you, Chris, first getting into the industry after you received your diploma from Mizzou?
I didn't, Colton. That's the
Oh,
thing. So after 3 years at Mizzou, and I've been open about this, I'm an open book and everything, but I was working so much at KCOU, the radio station, at KOMU, the TV station. I did not go to class very much. And that resulted in me getting very, very bad grades. And eventually, Mizzou saying, you're not welcome to come back anymore. So I was proactive, kind of knowing that that was coming. And I was already on academic suspension. I was not going to be able to lift myself out of it. So went after a job. And after my junior year, got a job at WOI, the ABC affiliate in Des Moines. And that was hard news because I had a lot of experience working as a news reporter at KOMU, and that's where most of my tape. That's what most of my tape involved was the hard news work, and so that was job number one. And for the longest time, I just told people, I'm ready to work. I'm ready to go after it. I decided to leave school early, but in all reality, it was Mizzou saying it's time for you to go. 10 years later, went back to school to finish my degree at Southeastern Louisiana, and after that, got my master's from the University of Cincinnati. So clearly, had I put my mind to it, I would have got that diploma from Mizzou. But at the time, my priorities really weren't in line with academics being first.
how were you able to sell yourself, Chris, when you were looking for those jobs at that time, when you were at Mizzou and you went through with the decision to leave school early?
Well, again, not my decision, but I could have gone, obviously transferred somewhere else and tried to go after a diploma immediately. But as far as selling myself at the time, it was just the real. And again, getting a lot of chances to do work at KOMU, putting together some fantastic stories, I thought, with the help of some great mentors there. And that was the only job, really, Colton, where it didn't come from knowing somebody who could help me get my foot in the door at a particular place. That was strictly cold. There's an opening. Here's my reel. Actually, I think they originally saw it on a site called Media Line that one of my mentors at Mizzou, Kent Collins, ran and picked up on me, and I took the job sight unseen. First time I stepped foot in the state of Iowa was rolling into Des Moines with the U-Haul trailer behind my truck. I I had never been there before, but knew I needed a job, knew I needed to work somewhere, and it was a good year, but it made me realize that sports was the way to go. Hard news is far too depressing for me. It was not how I wanted to spend the rest of my days.
Yeah, no, fast forwarding a little bit too, during, including your time, when you did go back to being in local news in Louisiana,
Yeah.
what were some of those memorable memories, Chris, from your days working in local TV when you were in Iowa, and then also when you went to Missouri as well? And then we will get into what you did in between that time as well.
So the local news again in Iowa, that was unfortunately more than anything, it's a lot of bad stories you cover. That's what kind of sticks in your head when you're not doing the fun stuff. The one really fun story that I tell people about Iowa was, this is a Texan who, went to school at Mizzou, so I saw a little bit of snow, but not as bad as it was in Des Moines. And my assignment editor thought it would be fun to see how the Texas kid could handle it when we're telling all these people to stay off the roads and the conditions are terrible and you should not drive today because that's early. They haven't sanded everything. The roads aren't quite ready yet. So they sent me out and I must have driven into my car skidded off the road and drove into like four snowbanks probably that day. And the story was all about how this silly Texas kid can't handle the Iowa roads, and you shouldn't either. So the live shot was me sitting in the car and basically the news anchors making fun of me. But other than that, it was covering Capitol Hill, it was covering trials, it was covering just the breaking stuff of the day. And then went into radio in Texas after that for a while. Got back into sports at ESPN 1033 in Dallas, and then got the itch to go back into TV, and that was Louisiana next. Got to work in Monroe and then in Baton Rouge, and covering games in a full stadium in Baton Rouge. Any LSU home game, incredible memories there. Getting to go on the road with the team to game at Alabama was really special, and then covering their national championship victory while during my time there. And we can talk a little bit more about that because it wasn't just covering the game itself like most reporters were that night. We were a small operation, so I had to do everything. I was shooting the highlights, I was hosting the pre and post game show, and all the time I was running 102 fever. So you can't call in for a day off when it's the day of the national championship. You can't call out sick.
How was that like, Chris, covering the national championship when LSU was there, knowing that you had a fever at the same time?
You just had to grin and bear it. You got took as many meds as you could to try to survive the day, and really still had to work the following day to do all those stories after the championship had been won, and then I probably slept for 3 days straight. But it's, well, one of those days in your life where obviously these days, post COVID, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. But in a pre COVID era, so long as I could hide it as well as I could, I was still working. I was walking wounded, but we made it work.
Moving on, towards Les Miles, obviously leading LSU to that national title. Do you have any interesting stories when you were when you were in Baton Rouge, with Coach Miles when you were covering that team when he was there?
Nothing in particular sticks out. He was always good to me. And the funny thing is, years later, now I work with his daughter. She is a color analyst here in the Dallas area, and we've done SMU volleyball together. We've done most recently the Conference USA Beach Volleyball Championships for ESPN Plus. We did a few days of coverage of that together, and we did her best sport. We did the American Swimming and Diving Championships on ESPN Plus. His daughter Smacker was a swimmer at the University of Texas.
Oh, well, that is all awesome, Chris. And I kind of did want to backpedal a little bit, during your time when you went back to Dallas to do radio.
Mhm.
So, how did that opportunity come about for you to move back to Dallas and then transition to the radio side of the business and then leaving the TV side?
Well, I mentioned that I got to work with Steve Lamb at WBAP 820 right before I had left for Mizzou. Came back a couple of years later for a summer internship there also. And this was WBAP was a ABC Disney station. So ESPN 1033, they launched that signal in Dallas in the same building, same ownership. And I wasn't a day one employee of 1033, but a couple of months later, as they expanded their staff, I got the call that they wanted me to come back and work there. So it was all about that internship and knowing those people, and obviously doing some good work during that time where they would want me to come back when they launched the all sports station.
What was that experience like getting the chance to host your own radio show? Because during that time you were there, it seemed like there were a lot of interesting things. Now, obviously, you can't think about Dallas with a team that is called the Dallas Cowboys, and also a lot of interesting things too. With you covering also races at Texas Motor Speedway with NASCAR, which is in its
Yeah.
prime, and also the Mavericks as well, knowing that they were still in the early stages of the Mark Cuban era when he bought the team in 2000.
Yeah, so the one show that was really mine was the high school football scoreboard show. We did that on Friday nights, and You know the legend of Friday Night Lights, I think, around the country, and it's obviously a very big deal there. So 2 hours of scores and interviews, and I loved it. You know, that as a kid growing up in Texas, that was my passion and has been since I was little. So getting the opportunity to host that show was really special. And then got to fill in for the Mavericks post game coverage, got to fill in on Rangers post game coverage quite a bit. And then the Texas Motor Speedway show. So I was about a year deep, I think, into my time at the station. And during a Monday morning staff meeting, our program director, Scott Masteller, comes in and says, "We are now the official radio station of Texas Motor Speedway, and we're going to launch a weekly show." And he points to me and says, "Chris, I want you to be the host." And I had the angel on one shoulder telling me, "Speak up and say you know nothing about auto racing." And then the devil on the other shoulder saying, "No, no, shut up. You'll figure it out. It'll be okay. You'll learn. We'll wing it. Fake it till you make it." And I listened to the one on the devil shoulder, I guess, and decided, all right, that's awesome. Let's go. And studied like crazy, listened and had as many conversations as I could have so I would sound intelligent, and went into that first show feeling very much intimidated. Like, am I going to ask the wrong question? Am I going to sound incredibly stupid? But did that for about 2 years. And by the end of that 2 years, I think I was the authority on NASCAR racing in Dallas Fort Worth, which is absolutely insane. But, you let the guests be the star. You make sure you ask questions that make sense, that are intelligent. Then you just sit back and listen. And it was great fun, getting to do that every week. And then obviously when the races were at Texas Motor Speedway, getting to be on location. And I did a lot of shows on location with a co-host, whether it be Jim Verdi or Brian Estridge co-hosted a lot of those shows with me, and learned a lot. And I say, you have only so much room in your brain to hold all these facts and figures and information that you need. After I left and after I stopped doing that show, it all pretty much evacuated. I couldn't tell you a single thing about auto racing these days, but I learned enough to be credible.
Now, as somebody who grew up a NASCAR fan, were there any memorable interviews that stuck out to you with drivers or maybe crew members during your time hosting that show?
Nothing really pops up off top of my head, Colton. Unfortunately, I'd have to go back and find archives. Probably don't exist anymore. Uh, Eddie Gossage was a regular guest. He was the VP at Texas Motor Speedway, ran the show, and he was an incredible man. And I think originally he kind of knew, could probably figure out better than other people that I was not exactly an expert from the beginning, but was wonderfully kind, was willing to have conversations off air to help me learn about the track, about the business, about the races coming up, everything that I might need to know. So really, more than anything else, those times, Eddie was really probably the most memorable person, not only because he was such a regular guest, but just because of just the person he was.
Yeah, and just talking to you now, Chris, it just seems like you have had such a phenomenal career, especially bouncing around so many places. So, what has that been like for you, getting to bounce around the places? Like, let's see, we got Missouri, Iowa, Louisiana, and Texas. I'm not sure if I'm missing any, but how has
No,
it been like for you moving and bouncing around like that?
I mean, you make great friends every stop, and you enjoy it. I mean, as far as Missouri is concerned, obviously still have great friendships from college days. Two of my best friends, still to this day, are now here local. They live not very far from me, and I met them in my first week on campus at Mizzou. And this many years later, gosh, that was August of 1997. And now we're in July of 2025, and I can call on them for anything. Andrea and Jeff Mills, and met them before they started dating, and now they've been married for 20 years. So, and then in Iowa, again, same thing. Just it was a really I kind of going into it, not a whole lot of people understood why I was moving to Des Moines, but you have to explain. I think everybody in this business knows, and those outside of it might not realize that you take the opportunity that comes to you, and it might be in a smaller market. It might not be exactly where you want to be for the rest of your life. But I got in with a great group of friends, found a great church, and really enjoyed my time in Des Moines. Getting back to Dallas, obviously, at ESPN Radio, the friends from my youth combined with the new friends that I made as a 20 something and getting to cover the teams that I grew up loving. That was really, really special time. Moved on to Louisiana where I meet my wife and then meet, so many friends there and have great experiences covering Louisiana Tech, Grambling, ULM, LSU, and just so many great events there, but made fantastic memories every step of the way.
Yeah, that is all amazing, Chris. And then fast forwarding a little bit to your time working for the Southland Conference. So can
Mhm.
you take us through, what your roles were with the Southland Conference and what were some of your favorite memories while you were working there?
Sure. Well, it all really got started because I went back and, as I told you, decided to finish my undergrad at Southeastern Louisiana, which was a member of the Southland. And while I was there, knowing my TV experience, I got an opportunity to be a sideline reporter for the Southland Television Network and started to make those connections within the Southland. I did have the advantage that one of the assistant commissioners at the time was a longtime friend of mine from Dallas. And we started to get to talking, and obviously it led to some assignments there. And when my time at Southeastern ended, the commissioner, Tom Burnett, was trying to figure out how to elevate the television network. At the time, there was not really a central person in charge of it. It was a syndicated network all throughout the region, and he had just a few people that had their hands in it, but none of them had television experience. He felt like he needed to bring in somebody who could make that their one and only focus and somebody who had experience in the television business. So I thankfully got the interview, got hired, and began directing TV and streaming, and then moved on to having a hold over the social media aspect of it all. And then gradually my titles kept changing and finally ended up as associate commissioner of the conference, doing the TV, doing the streaming, doing the social, and then also getting to be a sport administrator. And I had a great passion for the game of softball, really enjoyed it, and got to be the sport admin for softball, where I, consulted with the coaches. I headed up the championship event and really had a great time there. And, you know, so many wonderful things, kind of learning the behind the scenes of what happens in college athletics. Because before that, working as a TV reporter, you get to see a little bit of how the sausage is made, but getting to do it on a daily basis. I really loved that, seeing that aspect, working in that, helping to make events better, helping to make the entire operation more positive experience for the student athlete.
And how was that like for you, Chris, transitioning, to that more behind the scenes role of working in athletics, knowing that, I guess in a way, I guess you were going into the unknown, knowing that you were always on the broadcasting side of things.
I still got to dabble in that a bit at the Southland, thankfully. I did play by play for early rounds in most of the tournaments, and I got to do play by play in the championships for in the championship final for softball and for baseball most of those years. Later on in my tenure, when I got elevated to the associate commissioner position, I was strictly behind the scenes. Commissioner Burnett wanted me to concentrate solely on making the trains run as opposed to worrying about prepping for a broadcast and making sure I had that aspect of it down. But again, it was just really fascinating trying to understand all that, and it gave me a real passion for pursuing that as well. I thought at that point, nearing my time that was ending in the Southland, that my next step might be to be an associate commissioner at a larger conference or become a deputy athletic director on campus and eventually become an AD or become a commissioner. And I thought that was the path. And after my time at the Southland ended, I decided to pursue my master's in sport administration at Cincinnati. And about halfway through that master's degree program, I had been freelancing again and thought, you know what? I think I want to stay on the on-air side, but still finished it out. But that you get that bug, you know it, Colton. You get that bug to be on air, and it's hard to let it go.
And how was that like for you, Chris, when you did decide to go back and invest in your career, really working as a freelancer? Because I know I have experienced this as well. So I was curious about your path on how it was like reaching out to schools and, trying to build up your freelancing portfolio.
Yeah, well, thankfully, during the time in the Southland, you make so many different connections, and those people move on from the Southland schools elsewhere. And as soon as my time with the Southland ended, I started making those calls because I had to brainstorm that, all right, what's next? How do I provide for my family? How do we pay the rent? How do we, provide for everything we need here? And I thought I could go back to those broadcasting chops and put them to use again, and made calls and thankfully got a lot of yeses, and almost immediately got to start doing play-by-play for volleyball at SMU, and that's something I'm still doing to this day and something I'm really passionate about. Love that team and love being able to call those matches. And then Jeff Watts Productions, who did a lot and pretty much 95% of the production work for the Southland Conference while I was there. Called them and explained the situation. Like, I'm looking for more on-air opportunities now. What do you have available? And they've been able to fit me in so many different ways over the past 5 years. Love my relationships there. Mike Watts just recently took over the company from Jeff, and spend a lot of time with those guys. We've got another season of high school football on the CW affiliate here coming up in, gosh, it's about a month and a half away, coming up quickly.
And you have had the chance, Chris, to see so many teams from the high school and the college ranks, during your time as a freelancer. Has there been one particular team that has stood out that might have perhaps won a conference championship or a state championship and might have gone on to a national run?
Well, I'm just this past semester, I got to do the I got to do games involving both the national champions from NCAA baseball and softball. LSU baseball was at the Frisco Classic this past season, and got to cover them. Did all 6 games of that tournament, which is hosted at the AA Rough Riders Stadium in Frisco. And Jay Johnson is somebody, their head coach, that I've known since he was the head coach at Arizona, participating in these peak events tournaments, which I've been involved in since their inception. Love that group of people. By the way, Ryan and Carol Holloway and Nathan Wooldridge, all really special, and people who trust me to tell their stories in these tournaments, and they have, again, since they began. So LSU baseball this year goes on to win a national championship. And then I covered 3 Texas softball games for SEC Network Plus this season. Little did I know at the time that the first one would end up being the College World Series finals matchup. It was Texas Tech versus Texas. And that one, Texas beat them. Texas beat the Red Raiders 11-0, and then they go on to have an incredibly tight 3-game series in the finals. But so that was really cool to say I called the champions in baseball and softball this year. But SMU volleyball won the American Athletic Conference championship in their final year in the league, and I got to do almost all of their home games that season. And what a special group of young women that was that year, and really continues to be a great group of people. And I've really enjoyed following their progress. They went from winning the American in that final year in the AAC to making the NCAA tournament and hosting in the first and second round in their first year of the ACC.
So you had a chance to call those games, right, Chris, if I'm not mistaken,
Hmm.
during the NCAA tournament.
Right.
So how was that like for you getting a chance, to call that national tournament, with those first few rounds? I bet that was very exciting.
That was kind of a bucket list thing, Colton, to get to call an NCAA tournament, regardless of the sport. I've been pursuing it in baseball and softball, and that hasn't come yet. Hopefully, it will down the line. But for volleyball, again, to be with a team that I had so much invested in emotionally with SMU, and as it turned out, Missouri got sent to the same first and second round sites. So it's the where I started my undergrad against the team that I have been covering on a day-to-day basis for years, and that was kind of surreal to get to be in that environment and the stakes that were on the line. I had covered a lot of different conference tournament events in the Southland and in Conference USA. And that's in both of those leagues being one bid situations, it's win or you're done for the year. And that's just up on several different levels when you go to the NCAA tournament, knowing that, especially for SMU, where they were seated and getting to host, they had aspirations of winning a national championship, and for good reason. They had beaten Nebraska, who was number one in the nation at the time, then beat Pittsburgh, who was number one in the nation when that game came up. So they had every reason to think they could go after a national title. Ends up the SMU loses in that second round. So heartbreak and tears. And as the ESPN Plus play-by-play guy, you can't show those emotions on air. Obviously, you have to be even keel and neutral. But after it's all over, you go and embrace the coach and the players and tell them how much their season meant to me personally, and just congratulated them on a great year.
Now, Chris, I was wondering about this, since it seems every play-by-play announcer has to go through it. How was that like when you were calling that NCAA tournament, knowing that you did call SMU, but how was that for you having to have a step back on having that bias out, knowing that this was at the national level?
Well, even in the regular season, when they were in the American on ESPN Plus, and then when they moved to the ACC and it's ACC Network Extra, still another ESPN platform, you're still told to be neutral on air. Like, I am not in that situation supposed to be an SMU homer. And I'm sure you can hear it in my voice on occasion that I'm excited for something good happening to the Mustangs. But I hope that my voice rises to the occasion when somebody else does something well also. And I think I do that pretty well, and just able to turn off that fan mentality when the light goes on. For me, while again I'm with SMU all year, that is something to where I think I've just been programmed to know once the show begins that you're not supposed to be biased one way or another. And I've never been with a team radio network like that where bias is really more permissible. That's just never not been part of my career path. So I'm used to going down the middle on a show. It's not abnormal.
Yeah, and you mentioned it a little earlier on in the episode how you have done recently a lot of broadcasting work for Conference USA with a lot of their championship tournaments. Especially, two that really stood out to me were calling the CUSA Golf Championships and the Bowling Championship.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, how was that like preparing for those, knowing that those aren't sports that you really see every day that you had a chance to call it, especially bowling?
Right. Well, Conference USA Bowling, if you're not tuned in, it is the top bowling league in the country. They consistently have all of their teams ranked in the top 25. And for the past couple of years, both teams in the national championship have come from Conference USA. So it's really, when you consider how difficult that competition is, in some ways it's harder to win a Conference USA championship than it is to win the national tournament. It's really a great group of teams and coaches. So in that sense, that was my first time calling bowling this season. So thankfully, we brought in an analyst, Nishka Cardona, who was a national championship bowler at Sam Houston back in her playing days and still bowls as a professional, and leaned on her for the really technical stuff and the aspects of the game that I might not pick up on immediately. But watched a lot of the PBA Tour archives. But that's very different from the college bowling aspect, but still picking up on the language, picking up on exactly how I needed to sound, and then went back and watched several different conference championships from the previous year just to get the flow of it all, because uh, the games are very different in that you have different types of matches really throughout a round, and having to understand how that all works. So you kind of have to have a great memory for what somebody has done before and have a great dependence on your analyst. And I'll say that about the bowling aspect and the golf aspect. My analyst for golf was LaDarren McLean, who played football at North Texas, but is now a tremendous kind of pro-am golfer, I guess you could say, because it's not his career, but he goes out and wins some money on these tournaments, and it's really a big part of his life right now, and was able to lean on him as well. And for bowling, again, it was kind of starting from scratch because I hadn't watched a whole lot of bowling on TV. Golf, I watched the majors every year for 30 years. So I kind of had a good idea of the pacing of it all. But that's a little different from college golf in that you have to worry about the team aspect and be tracking all of these different matches that are going on at the same time, especially on the men's side for Conference USA, because they had match play for the finals. So that was a lot different than doing the stroke play for the women's.
And sticking with bowling, I have always watched the PBA. It's always been so fun to watch, just on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, just enjoying it. And, in watching those PBA broadcasts, it really does seem that the fans love to get rowdy and they are passionate. I was curious,
Yeah.
was that the same when you were calling the bowling championships for CUSA?
For the most part, no, only because it is tough for all of these fans to travel to a single site from all those schools. I tell you, when you got into the championship final, and it was Wichita State versus Jacksonville State, and you could tell that more fans of those schools had started to trickle in as they continued to advance. They made their way down to, it was in a lane outside of New Orleans, and they were having a good time and they were getting loud. But really, the energy for the most part comes from their teammates. I mean, they really support each other so well. And, it's not just the five bowlers who are active in that particular match. It is the entire roster they're locked in and really in tune with what's happening. So you kind of fed off of their emotions more than anything else.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then let's see. This is all amazing, Chris. I've loved the conversation so far. And I guess we can go from you have called so many sports, throughout the school year. How was that like having to adjust to so many different sports, as the school year rolls on from fall to winter to spring?
It's a lot of fun. I mean, I think, you get in a groove certainly if you do the same thing every single day, but it's challenging and it's really interesting to dip your toes in so many different things. And several of those sports that you mentioned, this was my first time to do them this school year. So adding those experiences was really special. And I think I was already pretty versatile. And now even more so, can be able to tell people, yeah, I called bowling, I called golf, I called beach volleyball this year, and then a couple of years prior, swimming and diving. So there's not a whole lot right now that I haven't done yet, but some of those broadcasts were from the studio. Jeff Watts Productions has an ESPN ready studio in Fort Worth. So some of those broadcasts were from there. A lot of them actually at the arena or at the field, and getting to do it at different aspects there was a lot of fun. But this past school year, Colton, everybody's goal is to continue to grow and find different ways to utilize their talent. And I'm very thankful that the folks with Conference USA trusted me to do those championships, even though I didn't have experience in those particular sports. And really the same thing for all of the other new employers I had this past school year. I got to do games at the University of Texas for the first time on SEC Network Plus. And growing up, the grandson of a UT Athletics Hall of Honor member, and my mom was also a UT student in her day. So, I bled burnt orange as a kid. So, huge fan. I was actually a camper at UT's Dish Falk Field for baseball growing up, getting to go back and call a baseball game where I went to camp as a kid. That was a dream come true.
Oh well, yeah, that's all amazing, Chris. And then let's see, and then you also have experience doing sideline reporting as well. So I was curious, what are the main differences in your prep work compared to doing play-by-play, when you do sideline reporting when it's bowl season around Christmas and New Year's with all the bowl games?
Sure. Well, there was actually a time last year, Colton, where I filled all three different on-air roles in the course of a week: play-by-play, color analyst, and sideline reporting, depending on the different game I was doing. I've done a lot of color analysis for college football, which is, again, a very different skill set, a lot more talking to the coaches and really understanding the different aspects of strategy and what these teams are trying to do. And as far as sideline reporting is concerned, it's all about those great stories. It's something that you might not be able to get into as a play-by-play guy, but when the right moment hits, to be able to insert a storyline about somebody and what they've overcome, about something that really shaped them as a player earlier in that season or earlier in their life. And you end up not using so much of it because you have to wait for that perfect moment to drop it in, not just when they do something well, but also when there's a gap in the broadcast where it really makes sense. So you have to be very patient as a sideline reporter versus when you're on play-by-play and you can get to that moment right then and make it work perfectly. But it's all such a team effort in any one of those three roles. And I depend a lot on my color analyst and my sideline reporter when I'm doing play-by-play. And the same goes when I'm a color analyst. I'm looking for my play-by-play guy to help set me up. And, as I tell them every time when I'm doing analysis on football, yes, I know the game, and that's why I'm asked to do this, but I was not a player. I was not a coach. So please don't set me up in a fashion where it's going to potentially make me look bad. Understand my limitations. I'm a little bit different of an analyst than I would be if I was a former player or coach. Sideline wise, you have those great conversations with the rest of your team in pregame and tell them, I really love this storyline. If this guy does anything well, please remember that and help set me up and foreshadow. And then, getting to, as a sideline reporter, really having a good handle on what I want to do in my coaches' interviews because for bowl games, I'm getting to talk to the trailing coach as he is heading into the locker room and then talk to the leading coach as they're coming back out of the locker room. And, you want to make sure that your questions are intelligent, that you can draw on something that you talked about during the week with them and how it actually made itself known during that first half of action. And then the same thing in post game when I'm talking to the coach and the player of the game. But yeah, that's the sideline reporting aspect, Colton. Now I really don't pursue it anymore. I'm really more after play-by-play gigs, but I've been doing the sideline reporting for the local CW affiliate on the high school game of the week for 6 years now. And again, like I told you earlier, how much I love high school football. So I'm going to stay in that job as long as they'll have me. And then that experience combined with our previous relationship at WBAP and at 103.3 led to me working these bowl season radio games with Brian Estridge. because he runs that network alongside Mike Parsons, and he does play-by-play on a lot of those games as well. He's the voice of TCU, but then when you drift into bowl season, he's all over the place. And a lot of people will complain that there are too many bowl games. That we need to have fewer of these. They're not worth it anymore. Being in the trenches with these guys, it means a lot. It's for a lot of them, it's their last chance to play football. It means a great deal to these kids. You can tell throughout, being there, they're locked in. And if there is a group of players that aren't locked in, where maybe they are thinking, I don't really want to be here, that's the team that's going to lose. It's always going to be the team in those bowl games who prepared properly and really want to be there, and you can tell that it means a great deal.
Yeah, Chris, as a college football fanatic, I 100% agree with you with what those bowl games mean to those student athletes. And, during your time at bowl season radio, has there been any particular bowl game that has stood out to you as your favorite that you have gotten to cover as a sideline reporter?
There have been a lot of really fun ones. I tell you, there are a few that stick out in my mind. I'll try to do the recall here. Uh, Houston versus Army in the Armed Forces Bowl. Okay, you've got a Houston team that is fully expected to win. It's Major Applewhite as the head coach. They've had a subpar year to their standards, but usually, like we talked about, the bowl games don't necessarily reflect on how your season has been. It's one more game, it's more practices, but it's not a make or break for anybody. In that particular instance, it was a break for Houston. They got destroyed. And I think Army was up by about 45 points at halftime. And as I mentioned, I get to talk to the trailing coach heading into the locker room because TV talks to the leading head coach heading into the locker room. So national radio gets the opposite. Major Applewhite could have drilled a hole in my head the way he was looking at me like, I do not want to talk to you right now. I mean, that was the funny thing because people on TV, while they were showing the leading interview for the Army head coach, they also cut away to a split screen to show Major Applewhite approaching me for our interview. And I got a few texts right after, like, he did not look happy to see you. And then the next day, he got fired, which is remarkable because, again, it's the Armed Forces Bowl. It's a reward for the season, but typically it wouldn't be something that gets a coach fired. And then there have been some other really special one. The Armed Forces Bowl, really every year, Colton, they do such a great job. The attendance is always fantastic. The one year where it wasn't, it was the coldest bowl game in recorded history. And it was, I believe, -8 or -10 wind chill. And it was our Air Force versus Baylor. Everybody was miserable. I had three coats on, I think, and the little hand warmers, little toe warmers, anything I could do. But I was absolutely frigid. I can't remember ever being colder in my life. And these guys are going out there hitting each other, trying to play a college football game in it. That game I will never forget. I've barely thawed out from it now, this many years later. Frisco Bowl a couple of years ago, it's now sponsored by Scooters Coffee. So you've got the huge Gatorade bucket style Scooters coffee cup that they dumped over the head coach in their first year, and it caught him by surprise. It was absolutely fun, and I kind of did my play-by-play of it. Got up with the big old linemen who were trying to carry this thing and asked them what's the strategy. They just didn't want to hit their coach in the head. That was really all there was to it. But that was a lot of fun. But just every single time these postseason games come up, it seems like there's something special. One more before we get off this topic. This popped into my brain, okay? First Responder Bowl, Western Kentucky, Western Michigan. Dallas, Texas, those two schools, as you might expect, not much of a crowd. But game-winning field goal hit by Western Kentucky. And typically, the sports information director wants to direct you to who they want you to talk to in postgame. But in that moment, I did not care. I needed to get an interview with that kid who just kicked the game-winning field goal as time expired. Freshman, and I this is a G-rated podcast, so I won't repeat exactly what he said, but he dropped an expletive in the middle of this interview. Thankfully, we were in the commercial break, taping it as live to be aired right as we came back from the break. Said the expletive, great interview otherwise. Our audio engineer is able to cut it out in the 30 seconds from when it happened to when it hit air. And that was one of the most amazing moments of editing in ever. But that sticks out to me, the way we were able to turn that around and not have to get our license pulled or whatever it might have meant to us.
And Chris, just talking with you throughout this whole time, it really seems you're a busy man, and you also have a full-time position as well. Because can you maybe go over what your full-time position
Sure.
is, outside of sports, and how is that like juggling having a full-time job while freelancing at the same time?
5 years now. Just got my 5 year service pin at the Community Independent School District. I'm the communications coordinator there. So, handling all things social media, photography, video, um, really just dealing with anything that deals with communicating to our stakeholders there in the district and beyond about all the great things happening in Community ISD. My boss there is Cooper Welch. He was a sports information director at Lamar University when I was at the Southland Conference. So that's how we got to know each other. And he called me a little over 5 years ago, having just moved to the area to take that job, asking, do you know of anybody who might be interested? And I thought for a second, it's like, you know what? I am. So at the time, I was just freelancing, and we were just a couple of months deep into the pandemic, into lockdown. So at the time, I didn't have any jobs because college sports had stopped. And it was an incredible blessing to land a full-time job. And then, the biggest thing, Colton, is that the juggling for me, it is not just about uh, the freelance work and about the full-time work. It's about family too, because that's the most important thing. And I don't know if you want to dive into this, but my family life is very interesting, especially right now. And the folks at Community ISD have been incredibly gracious in supporting me through everything that we have been dealing with as a family, with my daughter facing an awful diagnosis, and we've spent a lot of time in doctors' offices, spending a lot of time in hospitals with her. But again, they've been really accommodating, whether it be with family life or the broadcast stuff.
Yo, Christian. Well, first off, my prayers and my blessings also go out to your daughter. And I would like to talk about that as well. How's
Sure.
that life for you, raising being in this industry while also raising a family at the same time?
Well, first of all, my wife is the rock star because obviously I am gone a lot of nights for broadcast work, and she is handling things on the home front, and she's incredible. If she was not the woman that she is, there's no way I could take on what I take on. And obviously, I'm doing it to support my family. We talk a lot in this field about your hopes and dreams, and the big games that you hope to call someday. When I was first starting out, I wanted to be a sports center anchor, and yeah, sure, I still want to eventually one day call a college World Series game. That's kind of the biggest dream for me right now. But the day to day is that I do this, both the full time job and the freelance, to support my family. And Cassie makes that possible. Our daughter, Hannah, was diagnosed with a terminal rare brain condition called hydranencephaly. And there is broadcast aspects that actually are part of her story, which I'll tell you about in a second. But she has exceeded all the expectations that the doctors put on her. The prayers coming for her from all across the world have been felt. And this is a condition that for most people, they do not live to see their first birthday. And Hannah just recently celebrated her second, and she's doing great. She is, very close, her therapist think, to being able to crawl, which is not something that anybody expected. They thought she would basically lie in a vegetative state and not show any emotion, but she is very close to figuring out how to make those arms work with the legs. The legs are going crazy back there, but the arms are not quite coordinated with it yet. And she smiles at me all the time, incredibly emotional, sweet little girl. Um, you know, she coos in excitement, finds ways to show when she is happy and obviously when she's sad as well. Very communicative. So, an amazing blessing to us. And our son, Austin, is an awesome big brother. And, he wishes he could pop in and be on the podcast. His room is right next door to where I'm sitting right now. And he got in a little bit of a test when I was checking the mic before we went on. But so my wife and I had been pursuing adoption for a couple of years, and kind of everybody understood that. Whichever broadcast I went into, I told them, if the call comes and I'm told that I'm needed in a certain place immediately, I apologize, but I'm leaving. And I never really expected that to happen. There were so many times through the process we were talking to agencies or to birth mothers, and it was all right. The baby is due. If you are selected, the baby is due 2 months down the line, 1 month down the line, whatever it may be. But this call came, and our daughter, she turned out to be, was 3 weeks old. And we were told this birth mother wants to make this process go quickly. Can you be in Houston tomorrow at 9 a.m.? And at the time, I'm calling the Conference USA softball tournament in Ruston, Louisiana. And I get that call from my wife, say, we've been selected. We are the family for her. You need to get here. And I was calling a game with Malcolm Butler, and we got back from commercial. We were in the break, and I told him what's going on, and I said, I'm gonna sign off, and you're gonna take it the rest of the way. And got back on air and explained that I've never left the broadcast early, but I promise you I have good reason. And I started to talk about, I'm doing this little sign off here because I want my daughter to see it someday. I'm heading to pick her up, to pick up my family, and then go to meet her. And Malcolm did the game by himself for about an inning, and then Lynn Rollins, who was there to call some other games in the tournament, stepped in to fill that second chair for the rest of the day. But that was awesome. And then a few days later, we started to get her medical records to come pouring in. They weren't given to us prior to the placement, and we find out about this diagnosis. And obviously, complete shock and this roller coaster ride of being on the highest of highs. And this is our girl. This is the baby we've been praying about for so long, and an incredible addition to our family. And then we see this diagnosis, and we start getting follow-up visits and find out that her prognosis is not good, that she probably won't live to see one. Obviously a terrible, terrible blow. But from the moment that I held her, I promised God and I promised Hannah that I would give her the best life possible. Obviously, I never expected it to be a short one. I thought it would be a very long one. And, we continue to pray for that to be the case. Um, as it turned out, we got the second opinions, we got more MRIs, and the diagnosis was confirmed. We take some time away just as a family, and then, I have to go back to work, and that included calling SMU volleyball in the fall. I did not realize how many members of that team followed me on social media, which I was obviously very vocal asking for prayers. And I get to near the end of the season, and one of the assistant coaches, Coach Branson, comes up to me before the game and said, the girls have been talking, and they want to dedicate our game against Pepperdine to Hannah. And, immediately I'm blown away by that. Had no idea that they were following what's going on. and almost start crying right there. And the following week, the Pepperdine game comes. I walk into the gym and there's a big sign on their bench that says "Pray for Hannah," and all of the players are coming up to me in pregame, telling me how they're playing for her that day. And Coach Erger, the head coach, is wearing. We had decided, kind of in our prayers and our messaging, that Hannah's colors are pink and gray. So we had a little logo for her, and it was pink and gray. So Sam is wearing pink and gray to honor Hannah. And pregame, Jamison Wheeler, SMU's big superstar, is coming over me, handing me a ball to give to her. In postgame, she was in the hospital. Hannah was at that point, so she couldn't come to the game, unfortunately. But the game is dedicated to her, and I have to avoid crying on the air throughout the night. But you talk to a lot of people, Colton, about what their most memorable game is in their career, and there will never be one more impactful to me than that one right there between SMU and Pepperdine, the regular season finale in volleyball that season, because of what it meant to me and my family. Forever, forever grateful to that group of coaches and players.
How has Hannah inspired you, Chris, as a father, and as a man and as a human as well?
She is, like I said, defying all expectations. And I think that's the biggest thing. And really, what I try to tell anybody who asks about her is that, if you look up what hydranencephaly means, essentially means that the majority of her brain was destroyed in utero. So she was left with a brain stem that largely all it can control, at least what the doctors told us, was the very, very basics of human life. And she has found ways to stretch that out to make it do things that nobody thought was possible. Those laughs, those smiles, that moving, purposeful movement. Being able to click these little squares that she has in her, what we call her little room, to grasp these beads, to kick these mylar and these balls that are in this room, and to reach for me, to smile at me when I walk in the morning. She is doing more. She is doing everything possible with what she has been given. She is stretching her limitations. And I kind of try to think about that too. I've been blessed in so many ways, and I want to use that to use everything God has given me to the fullest ability. And whether that's being a father, whether that's being a communications coordinator for the school district, or if it's being on air, it's just being a friend, it's being a Christian, it's being just a trying to be a good person, stretching that out to its limits, and knowing that really everything that I do should have a purpose for God's glory. And I think that Hannah has showed that, her life has incredible value. Before laws changed here in Texas, she probably would not have been born, period. That's one of the things I learned very early in this process of looking at the diagnosis and what they knew about hydranencephaly. Doctors haven't studied it very much, because a lot of times when a birth mother finds out that that diagnosis is there during pregnancy, they will choose to end the pregnancy. So, not a whole lot of kids with hydranencephaly have gone on to thrive, and I think Hannah is doing just that. She is thriving despite the diagnosis, and my wife and I and her brother, we're all going to continue to try to give her the best life possible.
Yeah, Chris, and just hearing your story, just so inspiring. My prayers will always be out to Hannah, and your family
Thank you.
as well. And, Chris, going back, to your career, I'm a big Sinatra fan. And
Okay.
and one of my favorite songs ever, my favorite Sinatra song and my favorite song ever is My Way. And, there's always one lyric that always sticks out to me. It's just to think I did all that, and it ends with, and I did it my way. With all of you have done in the sports industry in our conversation here, have you ever looked back and thought of that to say, like, wow, to think I did all that in my life?
Well, I think more than anything else, I've been blessed with tremendous opportunities in my career. I've had great relationships, and those have led to some amazing experiences. I talk about what the Holloways and Nathan Woodridge mean to me with peak events. Getting called so many great baseball games, and getting to be in the same booth calling a game with the two people who this year called the CWS finals in Kyle Peterson and Chris Burke. Getting to call a game with them, what a career milestone that was. And, a lot of young broadcasters will reach out to me for advice on how they should pursue things. And I don't have a great clear path for them because mine was so different and so odd, I think. Working in local radio, working in local news, and getting the chance to come back and do play by play because I was working in a conference office and, we don't have the budget to bring in broadcasters for these early rounds. So I'm going to be the one to do it. It's my career has been very strange in that sense, is that it hasn't really been a straight line, to be sure. It's been all over the place, but I've really enjoyed it. And, you get to do things in this job that most people have to pay to go experience, and we get to be there as firsthand observers and get paid to do it and to tell these stories. I love being a storyteller, no matter what it is, whether it's from my early days as a writer to now doing play by play. It's great fun. And yes, college athletics is changing. Yes, it's evolving, but that doesn't take away from the spirit of these games, to the meaning that it has for these student athletes. And I try to go into every broadcast knowing that there could be a moment in this game that one of these players is going to tell their grandkids about. And it's going to be your voice on it. So you better nail it. It doesn't matter if it's game three of the CWS finals, or if it's a midweek uh, bowling tournament. It doesn't matter. It could be something that there's a lifetime memory, and you want to make sure you do that justice.
And finally, for you, Chris, what advice do you have for anybody who has an interest and just working into the sports industry, who has the interest in working in the sports industry as a whole?
Sure. I think, like I said, it's hard for me to really have great advice because of the odd career path that I've taken. But more than anything else, it is to cultivate those relationships. Like I talked about, you're going to find ways in the door, and it can be behind the scenes to start, and you make your intentions known, that I'd really like to be on air someday. What can I do to make that happen? And you follow the guidance of the people that you meet there. It is creating your own opportunities in some cases. There's still, no matter, I think, whatever market you're in, you're going to find a high school that doesn't have a network, and you can be the one to create it. And that's how you get your reps in. That's how you build a community, and you can find a way to take that and make it go to the next level in your career, the next step, or you just simply become the voice of that particular high school, and you do that for many, many years, and that can still be great fun. It might not be your primary profession, but you still get to do something that you love. But more than anything, Colton, again, it comes down to those relationships. I wouldn't be getting these calls if I didn't really enjoy these producers, enjoy my color analysts, people who will recommend me for things, and then, directors of broadcasting at different schools, at different conferences, who know me, trust me to tell their stories. And the feeling is always mutual. There's some great people around college athletics and around high school athletics who want to do the best thing they can for their people, and I'm just glad they want me to be part of it.
Chris, this is so amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. I absolutely loved hearing your story, your career path, all the amazing things that you have done in your career. Thank you so much for coming on, Chris. This has been phenomenal.
Colton, I appreciate the time.